one distinction which I think is really critical for higher education as it has changed in Australia during the last 50 years, as far as I'm concerned, is the distinction between how to think and what to think. I went through a system where the administration of each department was very authoritarian. There was a single God professor, and I remember that God professor could tell his lecturers what topics to cover. But what he did not do is to tell them what line to take in those covered topics. And I think to a large extent, the university changed from a situation where you were taught how to think to a situation which is a politically correct one of what to think.
Sounds like something for you, Jim, I'd say.
I sort of lost track after you talked about God Professor, and my mind wandered. But anyway, listen, John. Yeah, it was hard to concentrate. Well, John and I agree about this. Look, we get students at UQ. We get, one of the things I don't like about Australia, and I love Australia, is that there's not enough kids, I think, in this country who go away to university. So UQ doesn't compete with Sydney and Melbourne. This is just a digression. So what ends up happening is all the best students in Brisbane and Queensland come to UQ. Good for us. But anyway, what I'm getting at is you get all these smart students. We get the best students in the state at UQ, maybe the med school and the law school. And they are all very, very smart. And they have all learned that in high school, you regurgitate what the teachers want. It's unbelievable. In fact, when you come into classes I do and I say to them, I don't care what you think. I'm sure you don't care what I think. I just want to know that you've done the reading and thought. They don't actually believe you. They are so conditioned. Now, that's the negative side, and it's everywhere. The universities are very PC. The upside is, and Brendan and I were talking about this on the weekend, these students are smart enough that they become unbelievably cynical. They have no doubt that this is all, a lot of it is garbage, but they regurgitate it, but they don't believe it. And so overwhelmingly, now I'm not saying that kind of widespread cynicism is a good thing, but in the sense of a fear of this demand for orthodoxy, well, it doesn't have any effect on the smart students. They just know that I have to give this back to get a good mark, but they don't really believe it. And I mean, I'm generalizing here, so I agree with you. It's a problem, but the upside, the glimmer of hope is that I think, all you do is create these very cynical, smart students who can't wait to get out of the sort of puritanical, because they know that they're supposed to give back this attitude, but they don't, it doesn't affect them personally.
Okay, next. There's a queue there, so if you'd just like to stand up and you can join the queue. Thanks, Justin. Yeah. Well, not a long queue, but it's a queue.
Several people have mentioned this issue of PC includes, or not being PC includes the right to give offence, or free speech includes the right to give offence. If you ask a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists, they'll tell you that we choose our attitudes within the realms of sort of mental health. So why is it, do you think, and I'm interested in your comments on this, why is it that we don't deal with offence as a choice by an individual rather than something that someone else projects onto somebody? And if you think that that's a valid argument, is it an option, if you like, for fighting back along the lines of what Brendan raised?
So Brendan, maybe that's for you.
My main concern about the culture of inoffensiveness today is that I don't think people have necessarily become softer and weaker and more pathetic than they were in the past. The real problem is that society gives you a license to be offended, because it's the way in which you gain recognition. It's sometimes the way in which you gain even community support and financial support. If you have a group of people, a community of people, in Britain in particular, under multiculturalism, then you can gain recognition through advertising your hurt feelings. That's how effectively how it works now. That's more and more how the state interacts with citizens, at the level of citizens feeling hurt and the state promising to look after them and do something about it. Society gives people a license to feel offended, and as a consequence of that, you have all these community groups that have their offence antennae switched on to 11 all the time, looking out for anything that might cause any kind of upset. So, there's these posters in British toilets, for some reason, over the urinals, that say things like, if you're a Muslim and anyone has ever beaten you up or spat on you or verbally abused you or insulted you, you must tell us, and then there's a phone number, and you ring them up, and you complain about what's happened. And it includes everything from being physically attacked, which obviously is terrible, to being called an idiot, which is not that bad. And so there's this real trawling for examples of people giving offense, and then it builds up this whole kind of idea that society is more fragile and people are more easily offended than ever before. But even in that instance, I think it's important to resist the temptation of saying, you know, these crazy Muslims in Leeds in Britain are all just so pathetic and weak, and why don't they grow up? Because there is a broader political culture in which people are actively invited to experience every slight and every slur and every dirty look as a kind of terrible insult against their whole culture.
Janet wants to say it, and Jim too.
My favourite example of this, and it comes, of course, from Canada, which Jim won't be surprised about, where the Queen's University in Ontario instituted this new program it called the intergroup dialogue, where students were given the power as dialogue facilitators to eavesdrop and intervene into any conversations that they thought were offensive to gays, ethnics or religious groups. And the university decided to shut down this program, not because they thought that anything was wrong with it, but because adverse reaction to it had poisoned the atmosphere at the university. And it strikes me that, you know, again and again we see examples of this, as Brendan mentioned, increased focus on what is offensive and hurt feelings. And I have a real problem with hate laws. If we can't come up with laws which are wrong for reason A, B and C, if we have to put an adjective onto the laws, then I think they are inherently too subjective.
Jim, I think you had something?
Well, just a brief comment. I think I heard the questioner to be eliding two different things. I think the four of us, my colleagues might want to disagree, but I think the four of us are talking about important public debates. And that's where it's important to be able to offend. I don't think anyone disagrees that when you're invited out to someone's house for a dinner party, there are certain rules of politeness that you follow, because you're not, I think that alternative medicine is moronic, and anyone who takes homeopathic medicine needs his or her brain examined, because they just don't know what they're talking about. But I don't, at dinner parties, half the time I have to listen to some woman tell me about how a magnet's been waved up and down her back. I don't break the dinner party up. I mean, I'm not offensive, largely because I want to stay married, because I've been tempted on occasion. We're not talking about, I think your psychologist stuff is talking about people who want to be personally offensive at dinner parties. That sort of thing is problematic. But in the realm of important public debates, it's important to be offensive sometimes. If you're not offending anyone, you're not doing your job.
Thilo, any comments, Thilo? No? Okay, you had a question now at the back.
Yes, Janet, you already made a reference to the recent attacks in Norway. I'm Dutch, so considering the reference to Geert Wilders, I've been reading a lot in the blogosphere and papers in the past 2 weeks, and it's full, it doesn't stop. I want to ask all of you what you think that all the discussions on PC and all the discussions on free speech, how the recent attack in Norway may impact on it. Do you fear that it may impact? Do you expect it, or do you think it will slow down soon? What are your thoughts about this?
Thilo?
Well, this is a very actual question, because actually I have already been accused of being one of the reasons why the mass murderer in Oslo acted as he did. Fortunately, he had finished his the 2,500 memorandum before my book was published. Otherwise, I would be in a big mess. But this really shows how quite what for me ununderstandable ways a discussion goes. Nobody discusses the possibility. First, that the mass murderer may only be just that, a mass murderer. This is what I think. Secondly, nobody discusses the possibility that the suppression of a free and open discussion of the problems of immigration in Norway may be one reason for the rights of the right populist party maybe also a reason for the climate in which the mass murderer could live and develop his sick thoughts. It's only thought the other way around, and this is indeed interesting because if the political discussions may insult, well, in this case, the wrong side was insulted. If it is true that the murder could be incited by the criticizing Muslim migrants, then it should, on the other side, also be true that the critique by Muslim migrants could also cause the wrong reactions, but this is not as it is being thought.
Okay, Brendan,
so the atmosphere of insult, which is created by the kind of discussion, may also or should also have gone the other way around.
Brendan, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, the Norway massacre has been hijacked in a really disgusting way by lots of liberal left-leaning commentators who are using it to argue that certain forms of heated debate and heated speech necessarily give rise to crazy thoughts and crazy acts. I have to say that there's an irony here, which is that in many ways these PC commentators are aping more traditional commentators who say the exact same thing about radical Islamist preachers. In Britain, when radical Islamist preachers do their talks and they spout loads of nonsense about hating the West, how evil the West is, and the glorious hijackers of 9/11 and all this kind of rubbish, traditional commentators say they must be banned because their words will provoke violence. And I always say, no, that's wrong. And now the politically correct lobby says that traditional right-wing forms of commentary must be banned because it provokes violence. So I would urge the more traditional conservative sections of society to be way more consistent on this and to oppose the banning of radical Islamist preachers equally as much as opposing the banning of Thilo and Mark Steen and other people, although I know there is no moral equivalence between those two groups of people. Just one quick thing. The interesting thing about Prevx, the mass killer, is that he's a multiculturalist. This is if you look at what he says, if you read his garbage, he's given us an alternative form of multiculturalism. He criticizes multiculturalism, but very much within the parameters of multiculturalism itself. So he talks about wanting to protect his threatened white Christian identity from being overrun by this external form of otherness in the form of immigration. It's the exact same sense of siege and cultural paranoia that you will find across the board in the world of multiculturalism. So the real problem with Prevx, if anyone provoked it, it was the culture of multiculturalism itself, ironically.
Quickly, Janet, there's a few questions. Yeah.
We've, of course, been here before when the US Congresswoman was shot, and there were immediately accusations from the left that the right were to blame, that the strident political rhetoric in the United States was to blame for what happened. And, of course, it turned out that this man who shot the US Congresswoman, if anything, if you could make anything of his politics, it was more of a mishmash left kind of politics. Some people are just demented.
I've got about 4 questions, so we'll get through them as quickly as we can.
Coleman, I've listened to 4 people give examples of empirical incorrect thought consistently tonight. Could you explain why, after the Greeks started rational thought and objective thought and objectivism, we've come to a class of people who are probably 5, 10, 20% of the population, or probably a high percentage of elites, who have somehow come to this class in the last 20, 30 years to this position of irrational thought, non-objectivism, which is the way you've described it. How did we get here? How did this class develop?
Well, I think it's a combination of what Brendan said and a combination of sort of elite groups sometimes. I mean, certainly in the universities it's driven by elites sometimes, diversity officers and everything, but Brendan's thesis seems fairly plausible. It's speculation. I'm happy to turn that over to...
Well, one can only speculate, and that sometimes I think that there are cycles. And the one hope I have is that the younger people get fed up with a kind of the political the correctness they are they're confronted with, and by getting the cynical, the non-believers, they may to turn the other way around. So and this is a kind of oscillation within the society. The left-wing teachers produce right-wing students, and right-wing teachers, and these students become right-wing teachers, and then they produce again the left-wing students, and so it is kind of oscillating. And what Allan said strengthened the confidence that the youth may not believe all that what is told to her, but it accommodates in order to get the good grades, what is being told, but it may do quite differently in the future. So I doubt whether there are the universal laws of political correctness. I personally think that the wave of political correctness which we observe in the West is one last trial of the left to control the public discussion. But if it gets to a point that the society as a whole is fed up with the issue, things may quickly turn out different.
We've got a whole bunch and not much time, so fill it, please.
As one whose views have often been the subject of public comment, I have over time adopted the maximum of my former leader. If you can't stand the heat, you should get out of the kitchen. But I wonder whether, for the sake of completeness, given this is a recorded session, you would acknowledge that there are nevertheless some limits, and that there is a proper place, for instance, laws relating to privacy, defamation if it relates seriously to your reputation, protection of national interest, particularly national security. And if you do, I wonder whether you might like to put that on the record.
We'll go for the law professor first, I think.
Well, I'm a big fan of where the Americans draw the lines on this. I mean, you have to have you do have to have limits. You don't want people counseling murder, and you probably don't want people disclosing how to make biological weapons. So sure, there are limits. We're really talking about where on the spectrum, and I want to draw the line way out there with as much scope to speak your mind. So if we're comparing defamation in the UK to defamation in the US or even here, the UK system is awful. It's awful. I mean, you're shutting down science writers like Simon Singh because he says that chiropractors are just, worthless, and he gets taken to court. So we can throw around words like defamation. Well, yes, we want defamation. We want to protect reputation, but it's what the content of the defamation is, and the content of the the onus on having to prove truth. Really, it's stifling. So what some of these laws do, and I don't know that the non-lawyers appreciate this. It's not just the fact that you get sued, it's the fact that a lot of people are afraid of getting sued, and that keeps people quiet because they're afraid of getting sued and having to go to court. So I'm not very I don't want too many privacy laws. If the odd celebrity has his or her, if people report Hugh Grant having a little tryst on the highway with a hooker, and he doesn't like that, well, too bad for Hugh Grant is what I say. I mean, it's true. It might not have a lot of public notice, but the problem is if you don't pay attention to those sorts of things, you run into the Dominic Strauss-Kahn thing where nobody reports what he's doing because, the French have very strong privacy laws. Well, I think it's relevant to how people vote, and I'm not making any claims about what happened in New York, but his behavior is relevant to how a lot of people would vote. And privacy laws, I think, having lived in New Zealand, is if it comes to free speech versus privacy, I'd almost always go with free speech. But I agree with you, there's lots of limits, but we have to look at them case by case, and the default assumption should be let people speak, I think.
I think I can only take 2 more questions because we were meant to finish at 7:30, but what I'll do after the 2 questions and responses, perhaps get you all to, you may have another response. So Rodney.
Real-world violence has been mentioned. Why is it, and am I correct, that television violence seems to have escaped the PC brigade?
Anyone want to respond directly, or should we leave that till later? Brendan.
Well, for the PC brigade, it kind of depends on what kind of television violence it is. They're generally okay with, like, bloody military violence in gory films, but if it's anything to do with violence against women, then they want it banned. So it depends on the content. So in Britain, for example, the only films now that get cut or banned or thrown out of cinemas are generally films that have violence against, that depict fictional violence against women.
Okay, Tanvi.
A question to Brendan, and thank you very much for your comments too. I thought we were veering towards setting up an oppressed minority of conservative commentators who sought recognition for feeling offended tonight. But particularly, I thought what you described, sort of various groups vying for some sort of recognition as a kind of symptom of political correctness, is potentially one of the very weaknesses of modern liberal societies, that it fosters such weak collective identities. And I just wanted your response to that.
Well, off you go.
Yes, it does. It fosters very weak collective identities. But I think people do... I'm hopeful that people will rebel against it. So in relation to what people were discussing earlier about schools and the fact that schools now teach mostly politically correct stuff and garbage, I'm quite hopeful that people will react and rebel against that. I went to a Catholic school for 15 years, all my childhood, and they spent the whole time telling us you shouldn't masturbate, you shouldn't have dirty thoughts, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And of course, we all just went home and did it. That's because you know, when you're aged between 12 and 16 and people say, don't do this, don't do that, you just do it. So I'm hopeful that under the PC regime, when you're told that you can't sin against Gaia and you shouldn't drop your litter and all this other stuff, that people might start doing those things.
Okay, Janet?
I wonder whether the PC crowd have children, because there's nothing that corrects political correctness more than children. You know, recently my 11-year-old son, I can't begin to tell you the reaction when he discovered that Cookie Monster from Sesame Street, which he no longer watches, but he still remembers fondly, now refers to cookies as sometimes food. So I agree with Brendan that, you know, there will be a backlash.
Thilo, any comments at all? Summing up comments?
Yes, I think there is one the limit to the free speech. This is the personal insult. One must never be the personally insulting. And the bad and dangerous thing that that we tend to regard the critique of a group as a group, may it be it may be an ethnic group or a religious group, we regard this as an insult of the group, and that we regard each insult of a group as a personal insult, which means we have taken the shortcut in public discussion. Every critique of a group can be regarded as a personal insult, and because the better feelings of all people regard personal insults as not morally admissible, those people who don't listen carefully to public discussions tend to be misled in the direction that the critique of groups implies a personal insult. And this is what one has to clarify, that there is a big difference.
You can have the last word, Jim.
Oh, I just finished with saying, you know, have a bit of backbone yourself, because the PC brigade they have no backbone. And if you stand up for your views, they almost always cave in. My personal experiences, I mean, I remember when I first got to the University of Queensland, and I could bring meetings to a halt at the university just by saying how much I liked the Howard government. There was just a stunned silence. They wouldn't know what to say, and they would roll over. They always roll over, or, you know, people will say, it was terrible that they shot Osama. And you go, why was it terrible? I think it was a good thing, and they don't know what to say. So you got to stand up for your views. You don't have to agree with me, but you shouldn't roll over just because you know that everybody else, and actually it can be quite liberating and fun to know that you're going to bring a whole meeting to stunned silence. So I recommend it to you.